A vicious feud is raging within the Irish People's Liberation Organisation. The readiness of its members to murder and run the risk of being murdered has never been in doubt, but their claim to be politically motivated is coming to look increasingly absurd. As the wild men of the IPLO turn their guns on each other, Spotlight examines an organisation that is a byword for gangsterism. August the 20th, 1991, and the IPLO preens itself for the burial of Martin O'Prey, one of its most senior members murdered by the UVF. Providing the public face of the organisation and doing what he did best is Jimmy Brown. His eulogy, replete with allusions to Republican socialism, uniting the mourners in a display of IPLO defiance. But within a year, Brown himself was to be gunned down in his own car by a member of the IPLO's Belfast Brigade, at the start of a feud that has so far claimed 3 lives. One week after Brown's murder, and the man Spotlight understands to be his killer leaves the Blackstaff Bar on the Springfield Road. Moments later, he comes under attack from a car carrying 4 members of Brown's faction, the Army Council. Incredibly, the man, a former member of the Provisional IRA, who for legal reasons we're unable to name, survived the attack, escaping back into the Blackstaff Bar with only a slight head wound. Within 3 days, Brown's killer was able to strike again. Unmasked and accompanied by another man, he boarded a coach belonging to the Lambderg GAA club at Hannestown. As the men, women and children on board the bus looked on, the killers singled out one man, shouted they were from the IPLO, and shot him several times from close range. Their victim, Hugh McKibben, had played a prominent part in the funeral of Jimmy Brown. Despite this, reports at the time expressed some puzzlement at McKibben's murder, suggesting he was something of an innocent who played little or no part in the group's more violent activities, and who had been given to understand that he was not a target. But McKibben did more for the IPLO than merely carry its wreaths. We understand that he was the driver in the Army Council attempt to murder Brown's killer outside the Blackstaff Bar. McKibben, in other words, was targeted because he had tried and failed to murder his own killer. On September the 11th, the Army Council finally managed to avenge its dead, murdering Michael Macklin at the front door of his home in White Rock Gardens. In terms of territory, the two sides confront each other across the lower Grosvenor Road. Those still loyal to the Army Council in Dublin are on the Divis Flats side of the road. Facing them on the Roden Street side, the so-called Belfast Brigade, who also have a concentration at the top of the road around Clonard. Since the feud began, there have been frequent exchanges of fire across the divide. For those trying to live a normal life in the area, the situation is a nightmare.
A young lad tell me the other night that if he goes from one estate to the other, from the Divis side to the Roden Street side, where he normally would walk, because it's only a couple of 100 yards, he gets a taxi now because he has to go past a crowd of these guys who used to congregate at the Divis side, but now taking themselves all over to the Roden Street side. And it's that difficult that even young men don't feel free and happy, content or secure to walk in their own area because of what's going on.
St Joseph's Primary School, Divis. The school has been in this building since 1955 and is presently having to use the blocked-off road outside as a playground. A new St Joseph's is nearing completion behind the old one, despite the interference of IPLO racketeers.
They saw an opportunity, an opening, being the entrepreneurs that they are. They saw an opening and they went down and put pressure on the builder. What happened there was just putting up the railing, I think, in the first instance, and he kept going back every morning. The piers went up, down, or whatever. So eventually he had to take them on, allegedly, to do the security for him on that site. I have no idea what the amount there is involved, but it's daring for them to. Normally they never touch church buildings like a school and that because they're afraid of bad exposure. But again, it's indicative and vindicative of the type of people they're dealing with. They don't give a damn about anyone except themselves.
Standing in the heart of Divis is St Peter's Cathedral, where Father Wallace is curate. Just across from the church is the aptly named Twin Spires development, in which Father Wallace has played a central role. The site has been important to the IPLO. They've used it as an arms dump, stolen whatever they wanted from it, and at the same time forced the builders to pay them £250 a week in so-called protection money. The significance of all this to the feud is that one reason for Brown's presence in Belfast at the time of his murder was the belief of the Dublin-based Army Council that it was not getting its fair share of the proceeds from Twin Spires. The first the Belfast Brigade knew of this was when they went to make their weekly collection, only to find Brown had beaten them to it.
It has been a source of annoyance there for a long time that the IPLO were collecting protection money on the Twin Spires site in the Lower Falls area. When the feud then eventually did start coming to a head, start simmering, as you know, some of the guys were in Dublin, some were up here. When the regulars went to collect their cheque for their protection, for allegedly doing the security on the site, they found that others had, from the opposing side of the faction, had already collected the cheque, and that's what really, I think, brought it to a head. It clinched it. It divided the two sides then firmly against each other.
But the feud, which finally erupted with the murder of Brown, was the product of a number of festering disputes between the IPLO's Dublin-based leadership and its Belfast Brigade. Along with racketeering, the drugs trade has provided the IPLO with a major source of revenue.
Everyone in the Lower Falls, I mean, in terms of drugs, you've mentioned drugs and it's IPLO. They don't say one faction or the other. They just simply say the IPLO. And a lot of these people have made fortunes. Some of them have moved out. I understand that the police may know the whereabouts of some of the real drug barons, if you like, who have made so much money.
There's purely a power struggle amongst themselves. There's nobody else involved in it except themselves. And it would be wrong to draw anybody else into it. It has been simmering for quite a while. The sharing of the spoils, according to themselves, is not being evenly distributed. The spoils are not being evenly distributed. A few of them came back up from Dublin and demanded more. They felt that they weren't getting enough, particularly their share of the drugs catches, that they felt that it wasn't enough, even though we're talking in terms of thousands of pounds rather than hundreds of pounds.
According to some reports, at the time of Brown's murder, there was a dispute over the proceeds of a major consignment of ecstasy tablets. The consignment consisted of 12,000 tablets, which had cost the IPLO £60,000 and had a street value here in Northern Ireland of £300,000. Aside from the wrangle over money, Dublin had been worried about its ability to control the Belfast Brigade for several months prior to the feud. At one point, weapons were issued to the man who was later to murder Brown without the Army Council's permission. Brown's reaction to this had been to visit Belfast and kneecap the man responsible.
It was Jimmy's dedication to these standards which sometimes brought him into contact with people who had to be disciplined or expelled. And it was against this background that led to the present situation.
Those playing a prominent part in IPLO funerals are frequently a good indication of the type of organisation it is. This man is Paul Martin Donnelly, commonly known as Geek. Spotlight can reveal that he is the Army Council's Chief of Staff, and the man the Belfast Brigade say they will shoot on sight. The man next to Jimmy Brown is Art McCabe, sentenced last week to 6 years imprisonment for aggravated burglary. This man is Eddie Holden, a convicted robber. This is Tar Valaday, a man with terrorist-related convictions. And these men, leaving the funeral of Michael Macklin, are leading Belfast Brigade gunmen. The one in the front is the man who murdered Brown and McKibben. It's all a long way from James Connolly, the hero of 1916 Republican Socialists, whose ideas the IPLO would claim to represent. The organisation itself has its origins in the Irish Republican Socialist Party and its military wing, the INLA. They were founded in the mid-1970s with a strong power base in the Lower Falls and Divis Flats area.
I would describe them now as an organisation that is almost entirely devoted to criminal activity, and that any political character that it had, I think, has gone finally with the killing of Jimmy Brown. It started off as a splinter group within a Republican paramilitary organization, one which had many splits over the years, but has degenerated into one which virtually has no political identity that you can see.
The bloody career of Gerard Steenson, who styled himself Dr. Death, typifies the history of the IPLO. Steenson, who was responsible for scores of murders, was one of Jimmy Brown's closest allies.
The two men were friends going back a long time. They'd been in the official IRA together, and when that split into the INLA, they went together, and then they stayed on the same side in the 1987 split. But Jerry Steenson was a hard gunman and a killer, and Jimmy Brown wasn't. Jimmy Brown liked to specialize in so-called intelligence work, but he didn't have much of a record as a gunman, as a trigger puller, whereas Steenson did. And Steenson provided a lot of the muscle and a lot of the ferocity that was present in that section of the INLA.
Both Gerard Steenson and his senior lieutenant Jimmy Brown were convicted on Harry Kirkpatrick's Supergrass evidence. His testimony almost stopped the INLA in its tracks.
What was seen here today should not be confused with justice.
Jimmy Brown's delight when the appeal court released him and 24 other men convicted on Kirkpatrick's evidence was short-lived. The INLA was never the same again, with a number of those released becoming embroiled in a violent power struggle between those wishing to join the Provisional IRA and others wishing to remain separate. It was in this maelstrom that the IPLO was born, as a faction of the INLA trying to force the disbandment of the rest of the organization. In the feud that followed, 12 people were to be murdered, with the IPLO winning the grisly head count 8-4. Gerard Steenson's own violent death marked the end of the feud and the clear starting point of the IPLO. December 1991, and a former IPLO man, Patrick MacDonald, nicknamed Haircare, is gunned down in his own shop in Dublin. The murder illustrates how heavily involved the IPLO in Dublin has become with organised crime, because the two prime suspects are also IPLO men. Both men played an active part in the split from the INLA in 1987, and are alleged to have taken part in the murders of Thomas Power and John O'Reilly in Drogheda in January of the same year. Since the murder of MacDonald, one of the men has fled to Amsterdam, and the whereabouts of the other, a former corporal in the Irish Army, are unknown. The man who has gone to Amsterdam is the one most frequently credited with MacDonald's murder. Whatever else the motive for the murder, it was not political. One suggestion is that the killer was acting as a hired hitman for one of Dublin's criminal gangs.
Patrick MacDonald was in his hairdressing salon in North Dublin, North City. And a gunman walked into the salon, shot him and left again very calmly, very casually, had all the hallmarks of being a very professional operation. But initially the Gardaí were working on the theory that it was linked to a row that MacDonald had had with a family, some of whom were involved in organised crime in the North Dublin area. And in the course of that inquiry, they picked up some evidence which indicated that what they called a hitman may have been brought in. And this hitman is a person who has been associated, certainly in the past, if not so much now, with the IPLO.
Since fleeing Dublin for Amsterdam, MacDonald's suspected killer has been under surveillance by Dutch police and is reported to be receiving money from Dublin for drugs consignments, which he then sends to the Republic. His flatmate in Amsterdam, a Dutchman, who for legal reasons we can't name, has recently pleaded guilty to the charge of attempting to smuggle cannabis into the Republic from the continent. The man is said to have been terrified by his IPLO flatmate. One possible link between Amsterdam and Belfast may be this house in North Inner City Dublin. Jimmy Brown lived here with the Army Council's Chief of Staff, Geek Donnelly. The two men were constantly going back and forth to Belfast in an effort to maintain their control of the IPLO. In the run-up to the feud, there was increasing tension between Dublin and the Belfast Brigade over the share out of the profits. Again, drug trafficking was a factor.